Good evening. Welcome to the Monday, April 22nd, 2019 meeting of the Grafton Planning Board. First item on our agenda is public input. If anybody has something to talk about that we're not going to be taking up on the agenda, otherwise, now's the time. Seeing none, moving on. Proposed zoning amendment report.
I haven't finished those, although when I was drafting the one for the village mixed use, I had received a question from someone that was looking at coming into a district about how, if there were design standards, how they're able to get waivers. That got me into thinking that there wasn't a provision, same thing as there wasn't a provision before. So my recommendation is if we could pull that out of these action items, since we have the public hearing in 10 minutes. Perhaps we can get through the two decisions, then we can come back, because I did send you out earlier this afternoon, late afternoon, sort of some recommended language, and we did print it out, so I'd like to review with the board. So we have the decision for 2 Salisbury.
Alrighty, well. I'm in trouble, yes. 2 Salisbury Street, 2019-3, whatever. Draft decision. Comments, questions?
So I do have to, for this decision, just because I didn't have it in my hand, we'll have to amend the decision to reflect Sharon filling out the signature saying that reviewed the information and all that stuff. So that part of the decision I have to add back in. But outside of making sure that the vote is 5-0 with Sharon participating and referencing the Mullen as an exhibit, everything else should at least line up and be addressed.
Okay, well, comments, questions, corrections?
That was the only item that I would have questioned.
Motions?
Move that the board find favorably findings 1 through 20, that the board grant the requested waivers 1 through 5, that the board approve the application for special permit and site plan approval with conditions 1 through 5, all as drafted with the edits noted regarding the members' participation in the added documentation.
I have 6 conditions.
Condition 6.
6.
Okay.
Why did I say 5 when I see the number 6 in front of me?
Second.
Moved and seconded, discussion. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So voted unanimously. On to 188 Main Street. Accessory apartment.
So it'll be the same thing. Whoops, wrong one. Whoops.
This one has
Picking out
all 5 board members being present.
Yes. I'm just pulling it up. And we had done this right at the last one, and Sharon, you were here for that one,
Yes.
right?
So, anything?
I will make a motion that on special permit SB 2019-4 and site plan approval for 188 Main Street, the board find favorably findings 1 through 20. Grant the requested waivers 1 through 6. Approve the application for special permit site plan approval with conditions 1 through 6, all as drafted.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? So voted unanimously. Let's see. Staff report? Do we have?
So it's only been 2 weeks since we had last seen each other, and we've had April vacation in the middle of it, so I had taken a few days off during the week, so there's not as much to report. Basically, some of the stuff that we are working on, finalizing some documents for MassWorks documentation. Sorry, I was just separately texting Bob just to see if he knew what made like this. Also has been doing a lot of site visits as we've had some wetter weather as we've been coming out of the winter, and clearly we're in a spring, following up on some construction projects, make sure that those are in line, and also responding and trying to coordinate a lot with reviews for tonight's hearing. Participated in last Wednesday's sort of town hall open house, and that's about it right now. Preparing for town meeting and articles. One of the things, just to give you a heads up, the Board of Selectmen, pretty much as the special town meeting warrants were closing, submitted a article for a special town meeting to have the area that is Wyman Gordon added to 43D district. That required a public hearing for Monday, May 6th. Extremely tight. Depending on whether or not we have public comment, I'll probably be drafting things on the fly that evening, so we can end the meeting with approving some form of report. So that's one of the things that came in last minute for the warrant. Also, for anyone that's interested, the Board of Selectmen is going to have a layout hearing for Institute Road. That material was submitted by G&H and reviewed by DCAM, so that we can go forward and formally accept the layout for Institute Road for our annual town meeting.
Does anyone have any questions on this? Does anyone have anything they want to talk about under correspondence? All right, so we'll take care of that. And we have about,
And just an observation in the correspondence, I see there are 2 letters of Chapter 61A withdrawal for the 2 parcels that we previously reviewed, where solar development is taking place. My recollection is that we were informed that the 61A withdrawal would eventually happen with those.
on Estabrook.
Yes.
Estabrook.
Yeah.
So it's just
Okay.
an observation.
Okay. We ready to read the,
Sure.
why don't we do that?
Pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 5, the Grafton Planning Board will hold a public hearing on Monday, April 22nd, 2019, commencing at 7:15 p.m. in Conference Room A at the Grafton Memorial Municipal Center, 30 Providence Road, Grafton, Mass. The purpose of the public hearing is to provide interested parties the opportunity to comment on a proposed amendment to the Grafton zoning bylaw, which has been submitted as a citizen's petition to the 2019 Spring Annual Town Meeting warrant as follows. ZBL 2019-06, amends section 3.2.3.1, use regulation table of the zoning bylaws to allow for the cultivation and manufacturing of marijuana-related products in the Village Mixed-Use Zoning District in South Grafton by special permit. A complete copy of the text of the proposed amendments to the Grafton zoning bylaw is on file with the town clerk and the planning board office in the Grafton Municipal Center and is available for inspection during normal business hours. Robert Hassinger, Grafton Planning Board Chair. Please note, individuals requiring special accommodations at the public hearing should contact the planning board at 508-839-5335, extension 1120, at least 7 days prior to the hearing date in order to facilitate requests.
Okay. This is a public hearing. The purpose of the hearing is for the board to gather information to use in making its report and recommendations to town meeting on this article. It's a citizen's petition article. Do you want to say anything first, or I assume
I think if
Bob
we
wants
just
to
asked the petitioner to speak.
Yeah, the story, I think that the petitioner is interested in a particular use in the zone. What we're looking at here is just changing the zoning to allow the possibility. It would involve all sorts of approvals for a specific project, including a special permit from this board, which involves a public hearing, public comment, and so on. But we're not at that now. We're just saying, should the possibility of this be added to this, to the zone where this is located? Introduce yourself.
I'm Bob Heavey. I represent the Blackstone Mill. Future name will be Farnhamsville Mill, but and we're requesting the permit that you just discussed to be manufacturer of marijuana products. I brought some illustrations of what we will be doing. This first one shows the mill and some of the mill's property. It's on the intersection of Providence Road and Depot Street. Should I turn it a little so the audience can see? Or?
Yeah, well, we got to be able to see it too, so just pull it as close to the wall, you know,
Yes,
if you.
as I take them down.
Okay.
That's not working either.
Yeah, that'll help a little bit.
Some of the things we're gonna be doing, is we're gonna be landscaping down Providence Road, and down Depot Street with probably Quonset cherries and probably another variety, maybe some pear trees or red maples. We haven't decided on the particular type we're gonna use. It'll be all in here. All the windows, which are in bad shape, are gonna be rebuilt. The roofs, although they're recently been done, we'll probably start at the very top and work our way down. Make sure they're all in they, as I say, they're all brand new rubberized roofs, but they'll be redone. One of the biggest expenses in operating a business like this is the cost of electricity. It normally runs about 40% of the cost of operation. We're gonna do a lot of things to try to compensate for that. We're gonna use LED lights, which creates a significant less cost to operate, and it's very efficient for this type of business. We're gonna be putting solar panels on the roofs to reduce our cost of power. And I don't want to get too technical into too many things, but just to give you an idea, we're going to be doing a lot of things to make this operation. Some of the benefits to the people in particular who live around it. There's gonna be great employment opportunities for people, both people that are maybe just getting out of high school, as well as senior citizens, and everyone in the middle. The starting salaries will be $18 an hour, and that would be for people who are gonna be working as gardeners and carekeepers of the plants. Middle management, and there'll be more than one shift. We expect there'll be 2 shifts. So people who might need a second job, or their husband works and they want to do something to, after he gets home from work, so that they could work an evening shift. But there's gonna be double shifts at the very least. There'll be middle management. That middle management job will probably be in the $100,000 a year range. So these are good jobs. These are not fly-by-night jobs. There'll also be security personnel. There'll be drivers. There'll be quite a few construction workers for probably a year to 2 years working in there. Physically, as I say, the things that you're gonna see, you can see in the middle of that picture there, that looks like a black stain in the building. That's actually the fire escape. All the fire escapes will be removed, and internal stairways will be put in, again, for security purposes. And we've had trouble with that since day one with kids climbing up, and we're concerned about them getting hurt more than the fact that they can climb up. It's mostly the concern that they've tried to get up onto the top roofs on 2 or 3 occasions, and we've been very lucky so far that nobody's got hurt seriously. So that's a concept of what we're gonna do with it. This is just a different picture, and really doesn't show too well, but we're gonna be, as I say, there'll be trees planted all along this parking lot. All the parking lots are gonna get refinished, resurfaced. Basically, everything that we can do to that building, both internally and exterior, is gonna be done over. We're gonna be spending a lot of money on that building. It goes into the millions of dollars. So it's not a simple solution. There was somebody who asked before about the odor that'll come out of the building. The 4th floor of that building, there's gonna be a significant system put in there. It's basically a charcoal system, and all the air is gonna ventilate through that. It completely clears it, and then it's gonna go out through that big chimney that we have in the back and be dispersed way into the sky. But there's no odor. The system is built so that you could climb up and sit on top of that chimney and you're not gonna smell anything. It's a particular system they have for this growing process. From a traffic point of view, we're not selling the product to the public. We're selling it, we're wholesaling it to retail stores. So we're not gonna have people coming here and, I've seen pictures of them lining up on the streets. That's not gonna happen here. Other than the fact that we're gonna have people working inside, there'll be nothing different about what the building looks like now, and other than we're gonna fix it all up, but we're not gonna create a lot of traffic. There will be people working in there, so like the restaurants, the little restaurants in downtown South Grafton will benefit from it. There'll be, if there's any other, like the gas stations and stuff like that, they'll all have benefit because there hasn't been any activity in that part of Grafton in a long time. At one time, the mill employed over 200 people. We're gonna employ in the area of 200 people also, but they'll be on different shifts. So, we're gonna probably have an average of 100 people on a shift. So that's basically what we're doing. There's gonna be no negative effect to the abutters. There's, as I say, other than the fact that we're telling everyone what we're doing. If we hadn't told people, you'd never know. It's just not gonna create any kind of traffic. In fact, on this picture here, you see that there's a truck backed up to a loading dock. we won't be using that loading dock. We're gonna be using a loading dock on the back of the building. It shows on this plan here. You all who know the building, this roof was taken down. We're gonna be rebuilding this section so that when we have a truck come in for a pickup, it's gonna be enclosed. So once the truck backs in, there'll be security there, and, you know, you'll see it come in, and when it's got the product it came for, you'll see it go back out, but you won't see it on the street. There'll be no outside loading, or everything's pretty controlled. Is there any questions?
Okay. Questions from the board?
So, if I can just
Yeah, sure.
sort of for everyone, and I'm not sure who in the audience is here for this hearing versus
Maybe we could,
other hearings.
how many of you are here for this hearing? Okay, well,
They don't get to
that'll
ask
make it easier.
questions.
Oh, they absolutely do. I just want to know how detailed to go. So again, this article is about changing these. Oh, that wasn't a very good highlighter. This column here, making a specific use cultivator across here, and then product manufacturer. These two right here, moving from N to an S. That's prohibited to special permit. Bob, you had mentioned that really all this is basically giving someone an opportunity to apply. We have very stringent and specific criteria for what needs to be submitted for an application, what needs to be followed as far as steps, and make sure that information that's submitted to the Cannabis Control Commission gets submitted to the planning board as well. And just like all special permits, we are able to take into consideration multiple qualitative as well as quantitative criteria. So just like in the industrial and office light industrial districts for these two uses, special permit gives the board a lot of discretion, also a lot of flexibility in requiring documentation, making sure that neighborhoods are where this is permitted. And for people in the audience, this red area here is the village mixed use in South Grafton. Those uses would be allowed by special permit through the planning board.
We, with special permits and subdivisions, we sometimes do peer review. The applicant pays for us to have our own peer review their work. I noticed that being done in some other towns where operations like this are being looked into, and where there was concern about smell, because that's kind of a specialized area. I think I'm right that if a special permit does come to us, and if it is a point of concern, we'll be able even to do that, to
Yes.
to have our, because I know you'll have your people,
Right.
but, you know, it.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah,
I think you really need to tell the audience that we are not seeing what they're seeing up on the
yeah,
television.
well, yeah, our screens aren't working tonight, so, it's a little, so, anything from up here right now? No. Public, comments, questions? Please come to the microphone, identify yourself.
Hi, I'm Deborah George. I live on Nottingham Road. Just a question and then a comment. Is this just a grow facility, or will you be manufacturing edibles and other products?
It's a grow facility.
Just a grow facility. I have to say, actually, I support this enthusiastically, knowing that Grafton is looking for alternate sources of income, manufacturing into the town. On a personal note, I just rebalanced my IRA portfolio and included 2 marijuana stocks in it because I think it's a big growth opportunity. So I support this concept enthusiastically.
Good,
Thank you.
thank you. Other comments, other questions? Anything up here?
Just an observation or two. Sort of expecting the public to have more to say on this, although I'm sure everybody has their opinion. But one observation I'll make on this is that regardless of the specific use that is under discussion here, I think it's a great idea, to be able to reuse this old mill along the lines of what it used to do. Typically, old mills get turned into retail and apartment space. This was a manufacturing facility. Nice to see an opportunity here for it to come up as a possibility of sort of reverting back to that kind of use with a 21st century style of manufacturing. If I had my druthers, I would look at sort of expanding on the concept although the village mixed use as a zoning district is more oriented towards small scale mixed residential and small scale commercial. But here sits this beautiful building that's had its ups and downs over the years, that it's an opportunity for doing something here that doesn't fit within what we thought of when we were creating the village mixed use district. But I think making it possible for this particular building to continue its traditional use is an idea that I'm very supportive of, and that would be true if it was whether it was this specific use or something else. And the other observation, just as a reminder, that most of what we've heard tonight is about the proposed project, but we are not anywhere near this board approving that specific project. We're looking at the citizens' petition to change, to modify the zoning to make it possible for this project to move forward. And as the chairman pointed out, eventually it will come back for a very detailed review with this board.
Can I just comment one step further? I again read it as I was walking up the hallway.
Yeah. But I passed out the last time I was here the history of the mill. This mill has been manufacturing in Grafton since 1812. It was the first mill in Grafton. And up until the end of the 70s, actually into the 80s, it was still a manufacturing facility. Quite honestly, I didn't think we could ever bring it back as a manufacturing facility, because I've marketed it everywhere you possibly can. I've spoken to everyone from EMC when they were building out in Hopkinton to a multitude of other companies. I couldn't even get a bite. So when this came up, this I thought was a godsend, because it's given us an opportunity to bring it back and fixing the whole area up.
Is there a time factor? This field seems to be moving very rapidly. I heard that there were suggestions we ought to wait until the fall. But is there a time factor that?
We're going to run as fast as you let us.
Okay. Well, would it be disadvantageous if you had to wait another 6 months?
No. Well,
It,
it would be, but as I say, you folks control that, so we'd love to get started sooner.
yeah, actually, you control it in this case. The question is whether it goes to town meeting or not. As long as you feel the right thing to do is to go to town meeting in the spring, all we do is report and perhaps recommend.
Yeah, we'd like to be able to get started on getting the building fixed up, especially the outside. I'd like to get the landscaping done, clean that into town up as best we can, and that would mean doing it before.
It's a fairly long path. You've got to talk to the selectmen, and you got to go through the CCC process. And I'm not quite sure where in there you apply to us, but we'll be finding that out if we do this. I certainly feel it would be great to have some life down there in the mill. That mill hasn't done hardly anything for
20 years.
20 years. It is, as far to me, it's pulling down that area. To be able to actually bring it back is great. I don't know how much it'll bring into the town in revenue, but certainly, some fair amount. But just the benefit to the area is worth at least asking the town to open up the possibility of pursuing, of you being able to pursue this.
It's gonna give a significant income to the town. But I think more important, it's gonna give a lot of people in Grafton an opportunity to get some decent paying jobs. And not have to drive, a multitude of towns to get those jobs.
Okay, well, is there anything else from out there? From up here?
Joe, did you want to address anything from, I know Selectman had some different comments related to this as to the best or not best process to pursue this.
At the Board of Selectmen's meeting, they did ask as far as whether or not for zoning change, petition article was the best way to do it. They identified that typically people work with the planning board to craft articles, there was even some comments as far as whether or not the zoning for the mill should be revisited. One comment specifically was about whether or not it should be reverted back to an industrial use. I think one of the things is that the town and the planning board back, we're coming up on nearly 10 years ago when the village mixed use was first adopted, had this thought as far as allowing uses that then could encourage a village feel. The mill has the potential for really strengthening and supporting a village feel. So carving it out for a different zoning district and use, I think, may not be in the interest as far as creating that village area. The only other options would be basically creating a separate like mill overlay district and then working on multiple different uses besides this proposed petitioner's article, not proposed, and looking at multiple uses. To what extent it was really recognized that Mr. Heavey had met twice with the planning board. I only I did not watch it. I had just been told about it afterwards, so it is sort of secondhand knowledge. I did relay to the town administrator to relay to the Board of Selectmen that it was subject of a public hearing for tonight. I caught the tail end online watching that meeting. And I believe that was relayed so that if there was any opportunity for specific members to communicate to the board for this public hearing, that they were aware of that date.
I guess I read in the paper that, because I haven't had a chance to see your meeting with the selectmen, the mention of returning it to industrial. Not in my memory has it ever been zoned industrial. Since I don't think the map there, until we put in the village mixed use, I think that was business, just regular business zoning or residential.
Commercial business
Well, community
or
business.
community?
Yeah, and it may have been like some sort of commercial business use, pulling up the.
Right, but it's never been zoned industrial, at least since the 1986 zoning. I can't get a map, I haven't been able to get a map from the old zoning.
Back, it looks like as late as 96 or 2000, both sides of the street were zoned industrial.
Were they?
Yep. You can't see it. The public can see
Yeah.
the old Cartographic Associates. Those older
Okay.
black and white zoning maps.
Yeah, okay, I should have looked at, I still have the ones that are blueprints. In any case, I think returning that to industrial would introduce a whole lot more exposure to the people around it than just opening up the possibility of doing this one thing. I think that we should give the town, as long as you want to, I think, it makes sense for the town to have a chance to look at it and hopefully, do the zoning.
The selectmen were all in favor of it. They just didn't know
To do.
how to get over this front
Yeah.
hurdle.
Yeah, well, that's,
I would say that in the short term, this is the most practical approach to amending the zoning to allow this project to move forward. Longer term, yeah, we might want to look at some other variations, some other potential approaches to zoning for this particular, really this particular piece of property, because there's nothing else in the vicinity that even remotely resembles this in terms of what it might be suitable for. But as I think I said before, that there potentially could be other sort of industrial or light industrial uses that would fit into the building, but there's much in the, in the current bylaw that just changing this to industrial would yield some absurdities, like an aircraft landing field would be allowed there.
Yeah.
So it's not clear that we would want to revert this area or part of this area to industrial zoning and all the uses that are currently allowed in industrial zonings. So,
And-
we could make a long, complex project out of figuring the zoning for this, but this is a simple approach that
Yep.
facilitates one project.
okay, so if there's nothing out there, we need to,
I suppose a motion to close the public hearing and direct staff to draft a decision reflecting the,
a report.
A report.
A report and recommendation.
draft a report and recommendation reflecting the discussion.
Thank you very much.
Moved and seconded, discussion. Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? No, opposed? So voted unanimously.
Presumably.
Thank you.
Presumably, well, as Joe mentioned earlier, a draft report for this and the zoning articles that we previously held a public hearing on should be available for the board to approve on the next meeting.
Okay,
And I'll just note that I heard a rumor that Joe is scheduled to appear before the Finance Committee this week to go over the zoning articles.
Correct.
And to communicate to the Finance Committee whatever he can about what he thinks the board is going to recommend.
you don't need,
You can always come.
no. You know enough about what we're gonna recommend on, what we're likely to recommend on this.
I believe I'm aware of a direction, unless
Yes.
the board
Okay.
wants to clarify it in one way or the other.
No, I think
But you don't.
But I
you
always
don't
give
need-
myself wiggle room
I
to
got
be proven
Okay.
incorrect.
Okay,
It would probably be appropriate to inform Joe that if this board is opposed to this particular zoning change, that it would be good to communicate that to Joe.
yeah,
I don't think anyone is.
And I did not get a sense of that.
no, I haven't gotten a sense of it. That brings me to, the, site plan approval for, the library. We already opened that, so we don't have to read a notice.
Bob had said that it should be on input 2. I'm just trying it.
No such luck?
No.
Yeah, it's not,
He thinks the whole system needs to be basically rebooted.
well, I thought he did that. No, there's something, well,
We confirmed it's something.
Yes.
I think we could reach that conclusion without
Yes.
further study. Okay, anything on the library before we start?
Just as the team is getting things together, whoops, make sure I actually pull the right one up. We did receive today copies of a response to the Graves April 10th letter from CDW Consultants. It's all posted online, so if you do have your iPads, you're able to get that. Same thing, accompanying those are revised site plans. As the project team speaks, I'll bring those up on the TV so that people in the audience can see. However, of course, the board won't be able to, so I'll try to describe if I'm on sheet
You don't have
100.
you don't have a laser pointer.
I don't, and then like right there, I need to get my glasses for that. I
Oh.
rely on those just as much as you guys rely on the iPads. So at least because these are also online, if you are able to pull them up on the iPad, maybe we can try to speak, or if the development team can speak to the boards that they have, it might involve having to walk them around even. As we go old school with our presentation technologies here.
Well, okay, what
You
are we
never
gonna
have
do?
to reboot paper.
No.
Paper works even in PowerPoint.
Yes.
So
I never have, the paper batteries never run out.
Actually, it's not subject to EMP either.
True.
So I'd recommend that, and we have Ken Best with the library team here, sort of just give an overview of what's gone on since the last meeting, maybe go through some of the responses, then identify also where they are with conservation, since we've been alternating weeks with conservation and planning.
Well, I'm gonna, good evening. I do have plans
Introduce
on my,
yourself.
I'm sorry?
Introduce yourself.
Oh, Ken Best for DRA Architects. I do have the plans on my computer, so it'll make it a little easier for us to describe it so you can follow what we're looking at. And we'll go through the same sequence that, at least in this normal order, but I'm going to have Eric Wilhelmsen join me, our civil engineer, and we can go through if you could find the response to the Graves Engineering, maybe Eric, you can go through those points.
Sure. Eric Wilhelmsen with CDW Consultants. So we received the peer review letter from Graves Engineering. We went through the comments, responded to all of them. I believe they're all satisfactorily addressed, but we haven't heard back from Graves yet. So just starting with their first comment, they wanted to add the lot coverage calculations on the plan. We added those to sheet C100 and C200. Then parking calculations were added to C200, which is the proposed layout sheet. They had no comments on the stormwater management plans, no comments on the Grafton wetland regulations. Next comment is we had 2-to-1 side slopes on our basins. This was done to create as much of a deterrent as possible so people wouldn't walk across and cross the tracks and go to Cumberland Farms. During the conservation hearing, they had comments about the 2-to-1 slopes and seemed to prefer the 3-to-1, so we put it back to a 3-to-1 side slopes on the interior basins. Doesn't really change the size or shape of the basins, it's just the interior side slope went back to a 3-to-1. The small basin out back, we adjusted the overflow to be more consistent with the existing grades, and again, changed the side slopes to an interior 3-to-1. There are also comments from DEP about using a grass and gravel strip instead of a 4-bay. We got rid of the grass and gravel strip and expanded the size of the basin, adding an additional 4-bay for water quality treatment. Graves had no comments on the hydrology calculations. And we adjusted the outflow structure for the main basin to be consistent. We had a little typo where one of the views of the outlet structure was inconsistent with the rest of the sizes. So now it's all consistently a 6 by 17 inch opening. No comments on compliance with the stormwater handbook. The title blocks of the sheets were originally done on a 30 by 42 sheet, and they were plotted at a reduced scale, so that's what that comment's about. It's just a scaling issue of the plans. The plans themselves are consistently to scale, but they were reduced in size. We added
Have you in some way accommodated their, comments?
Well, we can give them 30 by 42 sheets, or we can change the border and redo all the viewports and everything else. It's to show it on a 24 by 36 sheet. But it's just a plotting issue.
Scale doesn't match when I get these either.
Right. Comment 11, we added a call out for the erosion control barrier. Comment 12, there was some work done prior to, after our initial site survey, so it doesn't quite capture the new crosswalk and an island that was done out at the corner. But none of our work is actually near that, so their comment was just pointing it out, really.
On the scale, it just occurred to me, maybe you could put a graphic scale,
There is,
there is?
yes.
Okay, so you can,
Yeah, you can put a, scale on it yourself and adjust the,
yeah. okay.
Yep. Comment 13, they reviewed the traffic memorandum. Graves had no further comments. And then number 14, on the south side of the library, there is maybe you can describe this a little better.
Yeah, on the south side, the wetlands buffer comes very close to the corner of the building. And when children exit the children's room, they have to go to the right to avoid the buffer, which means they've got to go up ramps to the storytelling area and then another ramp that brings them up to the front of the historic building. And we had requested that we be allowed to put in porous pavers to extend the walk towards the parking lot, so the children exiting would exit right to the parking lot. But it would mean that walk goes through the buffer. And we had quite a bit of conversation, particularly relative to landscaping and the wetlands itself. There are two areas that need to be created as far as wetlands to offset an area that we're taking out in the back. And that means in creating those areas, there's going to be a lot of disturbance. So our landscape architect talked about treating the back of the building with natural plant material, even some wetlands material, and then to compensate for the damage that might be occurred in creating those new wetlands, maybe it could be extended either side of that walk that we want to put in. And although they haven't made a decision, I think that they found that a little bit more palatable because there's going to be disturbance in the area, and so offsetting it with wetlands planting might.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure where the back side of the building
okay.
is.
Let me show you on the plan. I apologize to everybody here, but it's this back corner here. This is the edge of the buffer, that curved line.
Okay,
All right, and so the dotted line shows the walk that we would like to have.
okay.
But all this material through here and this area here would all be planted with sort of a wetlands or native species through this area. And then, I don't think this shows it, but there are two areas, oh yeah, here we go, one area here and one area here that need to be developed as wetlands. And so there will be disturbance in this very area in order to create those. And so we're hoping that they will look favorably upon the planting material to overcome that problem.
Yeah, and if they grant that waiver for the walkway to go through the buffer zone, the walkway that goes out to the front of the building will be changed so that it just stops at the outdoor reading area and they won't need those handicap ramps.
Yeah, and this is the walk here that comes up to the storytelling area and then would have to continue on to the front of the building right through here. So this is, it's a pretty long, and having a handicap ramp, just concerned about winter and maintenance for that, whereas this is a pretty direct route out to the parking lot.
You could even make it an educational moment.
Well, that's what we were talking
Right.
about too.
Yeah.
The children will be able to go right through that area.
Yeah,
with
teach
that
them about
kind of
wetlands and,
Right.
the challenges there.
And even though they're not in the wetlands,
Right.
it will have the feel of them.
Correct, right.
And their last comment was about the architectural plans, and Graves didn't review the architectural. So that's the end of Graves' comments.
I saw something on the internet this week that I was curious about. There's been a little bit of discussion about Super Park and how it fits into this, or maybe it was even the outreach meeting. Someone said that they thought there were going to be outdoor accessible restrooms. I don't recall seeing that. The point being to be able to serve Super Park. back
Yeah,
there.
I understand what you're saying down the road.
But it's-
We don't have any
Not in our plans.
provision
Okay.
right now
Yeah,
for that.
okay. I didn't think so, but
Yeah.
I did see that, and
That was something that was talked about, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago, and perhaps even before the last renovation of the library, adding
yeah,
the
yeah,
lift or whatever.
okay.
What's-
Just, like to track down stuff.
Yeah,
It would be nice, but
Yeah, you looking at the drawing, I don't see any doors, and I don't know how they'd be managed.
yeah,
Yes, kept.
I'm not surprised it wasn't thought about.
Okay, more that we want to talk about today, or this is all we need to cover this time?
yeah, this is, I mean, the drawings reflect these comments.
Good. Okay. Is there anyone who has questions or comments? You still have work to do, don't you?
Yeah, well, the one thing, I don't know whether you've had an opportunity to look at the request to not have a detailed traffic study. That was part of our application.
Right. So what they had done is basically said, here's like level of service, here's the number of counts, all this, but because we're dealing with a existing library, and we're basically just increasing, say, some traffic there. They tried to identify some of what they felt was relevant information for this application within Exhibit 4. They submitted. Specific requests as far as analyzing additional streets beyond intersections, more into the common, and looking at specifically 3 items. You can't see this, but it is in Exhibit 4. And then they did provide what was a multiple page document, 6-page document, identifying impacts, distribution of trips, a good amount of detail there, just not requesting a waiver from it they're requesting a waiver from submitting just 3 of those additional components. And that's where Jeff was basically saying he didn't have any comments regarding that. I think the main thing is from Ken's perspective, knowing that whether or not the board is willing, because the board would have to vote 4 out of 5 members in the affirmative to grant a waiver from submitting the fully compliant traffic study, and for this project.
We do have our traffic engineer here tonight, if you have any questions.
Well, after he assures us that everything is fine, I don't think we've had any comment particularly yet about concerns about traffic, have we? From anybody?
No one's raised anything as far as public comment. Really becomes a question as far as just the board going through things, and identifying what some of the remaining things are, and then also finding out from Ken and his team as far as where things are with conservation, so we have an idea. Are things fairly finalized with conservation, and there's final plans that you're preparing to address their comments? Do you have a continued date with them?
We have a continuing, is May 7th, I believe
Okay.
it is. And it's basically the letter that we just read, the comments for the responses
Okay.
to that.
Well, if you have your engineer here, or your traffic engineer here, why doesn't he at least say a few words?
Jeff Santa Cruz with Weston and Sampson. As I mentioned last time, we don't disagree with doing a traffic study. What we'd like to do is just pare down the scope to the main site driveways at the library, because looking at the distribution and the generation of the existing, as I said, we base it on what's per square foot now, how many vehicle trips per square foot of the size today, and then we expanded that out to the future development, and then looked at the travel patterns across the area. And we found that a lot of those intersections don't raise to that level of, I believe it's a 5% increase in traffic at those locations. We still will do a study at the front door to show that the operations in and out, sight distance are there, things can still operate in a safe manner. We've asked to have a waiver from the AM peak hour because the library is not proposing to open till 10. They've talked about the possibility in the future of maybe opening at 9, but your requirements are studying from 7 to 9 a.m., so we've asked for a waiver. And as I said, we calculated the trip generation based on the existing use rather than using ITE national rates, because they're more local, they're here, and they represent what we expect to be in the future. So those were the 3 waivers that we requested. So you will still see an actual study of the main driveways.
Would you be including the possible future library hours in that study?
We can. I mean, if they're still 9 o'clock, it still doesn't hit the 7 to 9 a.m., so it really doesn't affect the AM. That's what we're asking, but we certainly will be looking at the PM.
Does the traffic study require looking at like Saturday peak times?
I believe the regulations are only 7 to 9 a.m. and 4 to 6 p.m.
Just rush hours?
Yeah.
Okay.
And normally what we see is a lot of times your PM peak hour tends to be equal to or sometimes a little higher than your Saturday, especially in an area like this that's not really commercialized, where there's a lot of people destined right to it. It's usually your commuters going to and from the area to home.
Although on Saturdays, it's pretty busy on 140.
Yeah.
So, but, okay, thank you.
It might be busiest when there's a major event on the Common, the July 3rd concert. I'm not quite sure how to cover this base, Joe, because I don't know whether we could take a vote now. We could take a vote now that I suppose would be binding until it gets re-advertised, and it's gonna be different people.
Well, we're dealing with site plan, so
Yeah.
we're not dealing with supermajority. But the waiver is 4 out of 5. The second thing is that if they're wrapping up with conservation on the 7th, the board would be able to consider a decision on the 20th, because then we'd have final plans. Anything that's changed, because they'd be meeting with conservation, if there's any documents that have changed from this, which it sounds like from Ken, they're not going to, because these were just prepared. We'd be meeting on the 6th if there was additional information to consider. And subsequently, staff would be able to be prepared for a draft decision on the 20th so that we at least are hitting majority of the board before the election.
So, question from a timing perspective, wouldn't we be moot anyway with this? Because how are you gonna track traffic counts of a library that won't be there in 3 days?
We've actually done counts
You've
already.
done
on it.
counts?
We've already assumed
Okay.
counts at the front doors and on 140, so we know it's out there. That's what we used in the memo to kind of look at what was there.
And that's where they've prepared a rather detailed report on majority of the items that are within the traffic study. They're just requesting waiver from 3 elements.
Yeah, the question in my mind is whether the report that has been prepared provides this board with all the information, all the traffic-related information we need in order to inform our decision. You know, and I think I heard you say that this study doesn't extend out to the full area that a study that are meeting our requirements normally would, but that as to the intersections that you have studied, the impact on this has been shown to be less than 5%, I think you said.
Well, the 5% is your threshold for studying another intersection beyond the main sector. If the traffic increases at that location, and we're saying no, based on our initials, that it does not raise to that level. So what we're asking for is a waiver not to have to study additional. We still need to
Right.
prepare the report for your review.
Right, yeah, like I say, we have a traffic study in front of us, which you've already submitted, or at least some data for that. And the question is that going to be, is what you're proposing to do, and let me put it this way. If we were to grant those waivers, would we have sufficient information for our purposes? Regarding the hours of operation, given the library's current and possibly anticipated future hours of operation, the morning peak period is not relevant. The afternoon peak period certainly is, but you've already covered that. And going out to however far we would go with intersections, you're suggesting that you've gone as far as really need be. And what was the third? There were three points.
Yeah, and then the use of the local
Oh,
trip generation
yes.
rates based on what we observed at the site, rather than using national standards that are from
And
all
I would,
over the place.
I would say local data from actual observations is generally more valuable than nationwide averages.
And that's what we try to do if a facility's open and we have the ability to count it before.
Yeah.
We find
Yeah,
that's
it's
better. as
fortunate that you have, in this case, you have, what we're expanding the same use.
well. Correct.
So you have a baseline and you can mathematically expand upon that.
I just want to make it clear that what we've provided so far doesn't have the actual level of service analysis you'll be looking for. It's just in support of the waiver request.
Right.
So that's where, at least if we're able to give some sort of indication on those, because if we wait, then we're sort of receiving something after the fact.
I don't think that we can vote at this point.
Well, so let me, maybe I'm not being clear. This is a request for waivers
I understand.
so that they can prepare the traffic report.
As long as these 5 people are the ones who end up voting on it in the end, which is the day before our election, that would, I think, be okay. But if, as sometimes happens at conservation, takes another meeting, then the whole thing slides. We're after election day. we are down at least, well, we have no idea how many members we're gonna have. I'm pretty confident that three of us will be here.
Yes.
I don't know how long, he'll be here, she won't be here. And it creates a situation where you have to re-advertise, and I'm not sure that the waiver
Yeah.
in the
So-
first round counts.
So
In,
how long would it, because we've known you've had this information for a while. You're not going out and collecting new information. How long will it take to prepare that report?
Probably a week or two. I mean, it's, at this point, most of the information's there. It's just packaging up, running the analysis, putting the report together, reviewing it, make sure there are no editorial changes.
Is it possible that that could be completed the Wednesday before? I mean, that would end up being May 1st.
But this is the traffic study
Mhm.
without the variances. Is that what you're saying, Joe?
You're saying I guess the question is, are you wanting us to prepare it assuming we're gonna get the
If
variance? Or
I'm basically just asking a question as far as how long does it take to prepare that report if the board granted the variant, the waiver request?
Correct, that would be the 1 to 2 weeks. If they didn't, and we got stretched out, now we have to go do, if they say they don't agree with our intersections, we have to go recount those intersections, and that takes time. So that could be a lot longer process.
So the reason why I was asking is that specifically because of that last item. And this is really, I'm phrasing it as a question for the board. How do we decide on granting those waivers, which then result in the delay? If we have the report, then we'd at least know what is missing in order to evaluate whether or not an additional piece of information is done. Or we're sort of without seeing any of the other information. They've provided supportive information on why they think they don't need to provide it. But it's sort of like there's a potential for just going around in a circle, just deciding what is part of the report, and then how do you evaluate the waiver request without having a report in front of you?
Chicken before the
may,
egg.
may we live in interesting times.
So
I can, first of all, I can say, does anybody here think that they're gonna be not in favor of granting the waiver, based on what we know?
No.
The biggest concern I have is related to the additional drive that they're requesting and its proximity to the intersection.
I mean, and that's where it's good to be able to identify that because, and let's just pull up the board can't see it, but the audience can. When we look at sheet C100, we all know where the existing drive is.
Yeah.
The drive that will add in is then essentially in the location that we were evaluating for Super Park and for that secondary overflow parking area. The additional cut, which is in some ways the vicinity of the existing one, is basically just an enter in only for drop off and then coming out. So you're not creating two access and egress points. You still only have one, which then is farther away. They will have to provide site distance. Yeah. They will have to provide site distance so that we can identify what is existing and then what is proposed and what that delta for an increase is. It's looking at those specific three items. One is around the common, do we pick up any of the side streets? We are evaluating an existing, we have an open public hearing where they are doing more around the common. The 7 to 9 peak hour, and then the ITE trip generation, what they're using for numbers. Those are the three things they're asking for a request. So
Okay.
I don't know to what extent those three requests get at this point.
Sure, I'm trying to poll those who might be voting on the whenever it's,
20th.
yeah. How do you feel?
Well, based on the fact it's an existing, structure, I'm not sure there's gonna be a lot of additional traffic as a result of the expansion. Two, it's not open during the AM peak hours, so I don't know why they would have to do it for that. And as Joe pointed out, the traffic pattern really isn't gonna change as a result of this. So to me, the other requests, I have no problem with granting waivers to it.
So, everybody, I think, everybody who's here now, is amenable to the waivers. How that plays out against the calendar and all of that,
Well, I think that's just a risk to take, right?
Yep,
I mean,
exactly.
if we vote, we approve the waivers now and then
We'll see what happens.
things change, then we got a different issue. But right now, let's assume that we're all gonna be here for the vote and then deal with any changes we need to deal with later.
Okay.
Does that sound right?
Yep.
So, at least if I can translate, they should go ahead and prepare a traffic study based on, while the board's not formally voting on the waivers, the board has given indication as far as their likelihood to vote for those. And hopefully, if there is any speed to traffic studies, we might be able to, we could always continue this to the 6th in case we get a traffic study in. That way we could review it because it's not going to impact the site, or we're handling everything on the 20th.
Whatever.
Okay, that sounds right.
do you have enough,
Be better.
do we have enough at this point? Do we need to do anything?
That's
more?
where I think if, at least if we continued it to the 6th, we can see where we are. If you don't have enough time, you don't have enough time, but I'd rather sort of plan on that and be able to take 10, 15 minutes if they are ready to handle that and get that item out of the way, and then line us up for the following
So-
meeting.
So we've done what we need to do about
Yes.
this.
Yes.
Before we look at continuing the hearing to the 6th, does anybody have any questions or input on this? Everybody's here for another item. So,
I have to, do I request?
yes,
So that way, that will allow us in conservation, as it relates to the site, to be in lockstep for what they review with Graves, and your responses make sure everything lines up. So hopefully for that following meeting, we can get things taken care of.
Good, okay. Do I need to?
So I guess it would be appropriate to move that the board grant the applicant's written request to continue this hearing to Monday, May 6, 2019 at 7:30 PM.
Second.
moved and seconded. Discussion, hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So voted unanimously. Which means we move on to,
Oh, excuse me.
we're gonna take these in order.
Yes.
Okay. We move on to 12 Elm Street. We need a notice.
Pursuant to sections 1.3.3 and 1.5.7 of the Town of Grafton zoning bylaws, the planning board will hold a public hearing on Monday, April 22nd, 2019, commencing at 7:30 PM in Conference Room A at the Grafton Memorial Municipal Center, 30 Providence Road, to consider a special permit application to convert a single-family dwelling to a two-family dwelling. The property is located at 12 Elm Street, Grafton Assessors Map 11, Lot 8. Said property is located in a medium-density residential R20 district. The applicant owner is Joseph H. Frey. Copies of the application and plan are available for public inspection at the Planning Department Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 4:30, or on the Town of Grafton website at www.grafton-ma.gov at the Planning Department Development Projects webpage.
Anything, Joe, first?
Sorry, I'm just pulling it up, and again, this is for the audience, not for the board. Just pulling up the location of this on GIS in case we need to speak to it. I think any comments that I have would be probably best once the applicant gives a summary as far as his request.
Introduce
Good evening.
yourself, identify yourself.
Yes, I'm Joe Fry. I'm from 12 Elm Street. Yes, I request to convert my home from my single-family home into a two-family home. The idea is to get prepared for retirement age and stay in this house and rent the room above for extra income. The property is located in an area where there's numerous non-conforming lots or houses with some multifamilies already around it, one being a 5-unit building right next door. There's plenty of parking, there's a driveway for 6 cars, and the project does not change the footprint of the building. All the changes are interior to the structure.
Yeah, this is, we see a lot of accessory apartments. We don't see very many of these, which is a special permit to actually make a two-family. And it's allowed in your district. So we come at that a little differently. You said rent out, as opposed to typically with accessory apartment, we're looking for family. But
Right.
that doesn't come into play on this one, because it's two-family use.
So with this, Joe had mentioned that he's staying within the existing footprint. There's no alteration to the existing structure, so all the alterations are inside the building envelope. I did review this with the building inspector. Question was raised as far as the structure is currently pre-existing non-conforming. It's too close to the side yard setbacks, and whether or not it required any other approvals. Because the use, both the existing use as far as single family and through the issuance of a special permit is allowed in the R20 district, the building inspector and I concurred that there wasn't any specific role that the ZBA would have. If Joe was expanding the structure, they would have to go for variance. If this was a pre-existing non-conforming use that then they were altering, if this was in the industrial district and he was doing this would go in front of them and not the planning board for section 6 finding a special permit for extending, altering a pre-existing non-conforming use. So as far as the application in front of the planning board, it's in front of the proper board, and we are able to act on the request. There are a number of waivers that were requested to be made, a lot of them because, again, we're dealing with a existing structure, existing driveway, no physical changes to the outside, to the site, and therefore the requests that were made were in keeping with the nature of the proposal to do interior changes to allow for a two-family dwelling.
Okay. Questions from the board? Questions up here? Anybody out there have questions or comments? Do we need anything more?
Doesn't sound like anything else is needed, except maybe for a motion to close the public hearing and direct staff to draft a decision based upon the information submitted and the testimony received.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion. Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So voted. He'll draft a report. He'll draft a decision, and we'll take it up at some real soon meeting.
Very good. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
All right. 80 Worcester Street.
On to the next. The Grafton Planning Board will hold a public hearing on Monday, April 22nd, 2019, commencing at 7:30 PM in Conference Room A at the Grafton Memorial Municipal Center, 30 Providence Road, to consider an application pursuant to Section 4.4.4 of the Grafton zoning bylaw for a special permit for sign relief relating to square footage of a freestanding sign for Marcella's Hotspot located at 80 Worcester Street, shown as Grafton's Assessor's Map 55, Lot 98. Said property is located in the Community Business Zoning District. The applicant is Marcella Regal, and the owner is Edward M., I'm gonna not do this well, DeFutis, trustee Cranberry Bog Nominee Trust. Copies of the application are available for public inspection at the Planning Department Monday through Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., or on the Town of Grafton website at www.grafton-ma.gov at the Planning Department Development Projects webpage.
Is the applicant here?
See if she's here.
Is the applicant here, or someone? Well,
Not even the
right.
owner.
well, yeah, is the owner here? Okay. I'm afraid that this, I emailed Joe, I looked at what we have on the website, and, just, we don't have enough information, and I have serious questions about the situation.
So, as far as, well, Bob has communicated to me some questions. If anyone else has any other questions, feel free to email me. And if we continue it to the next meeting, I'll make sure that the applicant is apprised as far as those questions, and even encouraging the owner of the building to attend as well.
Based on the information that we have on the website, it looks like the existing sign already exceeds the allowable sign area.
Yes.
And this appears to ask to add more sign area by putting it on below the main sign area on the support. They're looking for relief under the provision we have that we can grant certain kinds of relief. But that requires like an extraordinary, I've forgotten the exact word, but extraordinary
Hardship,
circumstance.
financial, yep.
Right. So far, I don't see how this differs from all the other people we hear from who want to squeeze more on their sign than they have room for. I mean, this happened up at the Stop and Shop Plaza. I remember that. They had to fit into the area, when they added, they had to fit into the area. I also, usually the sign belongs to the main sign that you're talking about, the permit for, usually belongs to the property owner, not to one of the tenants.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure who should be applying for this. I can't tell whether the height of the existing sign is compliant. I can't tell if the setback is compliant.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would agree, Bob. There's so many things looking at this that just screamed, why are we even seeing this? It's outside of, does the person have the right standing to even bring this? And while the business may directly have a desire for signage and hardship in the sense that more signage could, in theory, bring more business, that's an argument with the landlord. She rented the space. Our zoning bylaw is not something to grant relief of just because their landlord won't give her sign space.
Yep. That was my other.
Yeah.
My other.
No, and that's where the owner of the building signed the application. I know from communicating with Bob, who had been in communication with, or we had met with the applicant, and Bob, on separate issues, have been talking to the property owner, basically put the onus of this application on the tenant. And I had mentioned in an email to Bob that, perhaps as far as in support of the application, the board is looking for some sort of either communication or for the property owner to come in person to talk to the board about the request. This is one of those things that Bob and I had a challenge as far as the tenant wanted to make an application to the board. It is outside of the norm as far as when people are looking for increase in signage in area where that expansion is occurring, because it's on a support structure. At the same time, a separate freestanding sign would also not be in keeping with the bylaw. Temporary signs would not be in keeping with the bylaw anyways. It was communicated the challenges, but the tenant wanted to go forward because she has no opportunity for signs on it.
She and her landlord are where this gets resolved. The same, Stop and Shop, I know, almost across the street, we heard from the people across the street, or close to across the street, that have a whole bunch.
The coffee shop.
The coffee shop, and maybe some others. They all have the problem that the current bylaw limits the amount of space, so if you have a bunch of businesses, there isn't a whole lot of space for each one. My thought is this is one of this general issue, is one that I've been wanting us to look at as part of our signed bylaw work and find out more about what the problem is and what the answers should be, and that we should, as far as I'm concerned, this should be folded into that rather than I don't see granting a special based on what we have. I just don't see it.
It seems as if plazas or multi-tenant situations perhaps have a larger tenant that took up a certain amount of space that then becomes subdivided, and so they're trying to carve up their pie, i.e. their sign, in more ways than they ever previously designed it for. But now, in the meantime, they've given away space. And so again, that's the landlord. They've chosen to carve up their sign to match agreements with their tenants.
Yeah, but counter to that, if that's what's required to rent those spaces, is to carve it up into smaller spaces, then maybe there's a need to look at the sign law to support the needs of the businesses so that they can fill their, their buildings.
There's
So-
nothing precluding them from doing that. They just would have to change their signage when they change tenants.
They take their allowed area and divide it up whichever way makes sense, and whatever sign they put up, they'd be well advised to have it designed so that that's doable.
Yeah, I just think we should relook at this whole sign law. I just
Right.
don't think it
And-
supports businesses
And,
well.
and I've been encouraging us to do exactly that.
And I think part of what you alluded to, Bob, was the notion, and we've seen in several cases like this over the years where a multi-tenant facility can have a hard time accommodating all of their tenants with signs that are reasonably visible. And so, yeah, I would certainly support, and that ties into something else that we had, another discussion item on tonight's agenda even, that's an item, that we ought to take a closer look at, and if our sign bylaw needs to be improved to better accommodate multi-tenant locations, let's figure out what we can do so that makes more sense. But that's not something we're going to not something that would be appropriate to try to solve for one specific situation here.
So, does the board want to, ordinarily, we don't continue a hearing without a formal request, a written request from the applicant. Applicant isn't here to do that. What's the wish of the board? To close the hearing and,
Draft the decision.
I think we would have no choice
well,
at this point without anybody here to ask for a continuance, right, Joe?
Well, the whole applicant request for a continuance is the board's
Policy.
practice. It's not something that many towns actually follow, and that the boards themselves are the ones that move for a continuance if they don't have enough information to make a decision. So this is a local creature, not something that's required by statute.
no, but it's, in training that I've had, it's been recommended, so as to avoid opening a window and.
The reason why it's recommended is because it reflects concurrence with the applicant that they're agreeing to a continuance, rather than getting into an argument where the board looking for a continuance and the applicant feeling that the board is artificially delaying a proceeding. Here, without the applicant in front of us, that argument can't be made. But it's up to the board. The board can close the hearing and draft a decision based on the information in front of it. Board can continue the hearing and try to get additional information and even information from the property owner on the nature of the request.
Well, I
There's
also,
a lot of,
I want the dimensions, all, the location, setback from the property, all of that stuff too. Current sign size.
Yeah, one could sort of suggest that maybe the lacking that kind of information, this application really was incomplete.
Yes.
We could take that position. We could, yeah, I wouldn't mind giving the applicant and the property owner a chance to provide us with more information relative to this, although
We did. They didn't show up.
I guess my question is, if we had additional information, would our decision be different?
Well, it would take a heck of a lot of additional information.
Right.
If everything is pointing me towards no.
Right.
You have to be significantly different information than what we see.
Right.
In other words, it would
It would
have
have
to
to
say
contradict
something,
this
right,
information.
something we have is wrong based on the application, then it presents entirely differently than what we're seeing. But given the location proposed, given the lack of true hardship presented with the information we have, I would say I move to close the public hearing and draft a decision taking into account the information we have.
I think I just heard a motion.
You did. I haven't heard a second though.
I'm gonna second it.
Moved and seconded. Discussion. Discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? So voted unanimously.
They didn't even bother to show up. It's not-
Well, they, amateur. Not necessarily knowing. Okay,
Moving on.
getting good value for the ticket price, aren't you? Now we come to, I'm not even gonna try to say
Feature
the
presentation.
Why
yeah,
everybody's here.
the main attraction here, I don't know how to say, Brigati Village. Anything you want to,
so as the applicant and his consultants get set up and speak, when we started off our first hearing a month ago, we had stated there was going to be a sort of a two-step process. The first hearing really had to deal with introducing the site, some of the civil engineering issues, stormwater, site design, getting into some of the comments raised by Graves Engineering, and that the second hearing was going to be devoted to traffic. The town's peer review consultant had provided a traffic report, and since the last hearing had been in communication with the applicant's traffic engineer on doing additional counts, preparing additional material, and a revised traffic report. That revised traffic report has not been produced yet. My understanding is that that is forthcoming, and that our traffic consultant will need a week in order to review, to be able to provide the board with a report. So there was a comment via email that I received today about pushing off the traffic for subsequent meeting, so that we can make sure that any additional material and analysis that need to be done was able to be completed and peer reviewed, and brought that information brought before the board. So in communication with the development team, they were going to essentially address some of those comments that I just mentioned, but then go into some additional issues as far as responding to previously raised comments about landscaping, site sections, and other design elements. And just for the development team, you can see some black screens here. The only screens that are working are the ones that the audience can see. So hopefully the material that we had posted today, as far as public comments, the board has that. If you do have any hard copies of anything else, I could distribute them around. But the nice illustration you gave me to put up there, that I will not have. I can make copies for the board to see, and we can just grab it off the printer. There was some landscape material that they had sent to present on the TVs, as far as just what additional buffer landscaping would look like.
Okay.
What's that?
Do you want them to make the copies of that stuff too?
The public comments are on, but I saw that there was something. The what?
Yeah, that's not on here.
Which isn't?
Yeah, I don't.
Landscape buffer.
I don't see it on there. No.
Can you email it to us? Does everybody have access to their email?
Yep.
Well, it's not going to get here tonight to me.
Your email?
I don't do my email on this.
Oh,
Yeah, neither do I.
I could look at it on my iPhone.
How did you break the monitors, Joe?
Fairly.
What?
How did you break the monitors?
With skill.
Oh, perfect.
Wow.
Nice job.
we have gremlins in this room.
Yeah, I can see that.
If you want to head over to the printer.
Okay. While that's, I was reminded, in looking through some of this, I was reminded, I think there was a comment that you've got, I've forgotten how many 100 feet, the length of cul-de-sac question. Have we documented all the way from the intersection, Church Street, what the distance is? From
We
Church
have.
Street all the way to the most distant point?
We have, Mr. Chairman.
I don't remember the number.
If I could, just for introductory purposes, Wayne Bellick, WDA Design Group. Here joined again by Dave Brossi of Brigati Village. And joining us tonight as well is Jim Almonte. He's a senior landscape architect in the firm. He's the registered landscape architect that worked on the project and who had gone out to the property with me, was it last week?
Yes.
Last week, to walk the perimeter of the property to see what the abutters were looking at, and what vice versa, what we were looking at from the property. So, Mr. Chairman, yes, so we have a distance, we did take it from the center line intersection of Church Street and West Street, ran that up to the intersection of the loop, and that was a distance of 500 feet, just shy of 500 feet at the loop, where the loop comes back on itself. And the total length of the loop, I think, was 1,000 feet, where it comes back on itself, is about 1,000 feet. And then from, at about Station 4, so
So that would be about, let's see, it's about 350 feet for the spur road, which is about 450 feet. It's probably about 1,000 feet in to its furthest
Yeah,
point.
because it's supposed to be measured to the most distant point. Not necessarily, you know, up in the middle of the loop or whatever, but whatever the most distant point is. Anyway,
Thank you.
okay, so you have some things you want to tell us.
So since we've come before the planning board, as you know, we've been to the commission, I think, a couple times, addressed stormwater, answered a few questions there. There were some questions about some of the resource areas and the potential for vernal pools out there. We believe that has been addressed to the satisfaction of the commission. And we have been, we had drafted the planning board letter in response to the Graves Engineering comments, but because of some of the additional information that we've added to the plans as a result of our site visit for the landscaping, we're in the process of updating the plans with that information and finalizing the design of the stormwater, redesign of the stormwater basin. With that, we have at this point, that's about it. So what we were hoping to do tonight, Mr. Chairman, like I said, our regrets for not having the traffic before you. We did speak with the traffic consultant who, as Joe indicated, had received their peer review letter from MDM requesting additional information. They are doing some data collection beginning this week. So I think in terms of timeframes, they're probably going to need about a week or two to pull their information together. So that gives you some indication as to when they will be available. But like I said, what we did, and Jim can weigh in at some point, seeing that he's the registered landscape architect on the project. We walked the perimeter of the site at those areas which were areas of concern behind the former yeoman's house. We had gone all the way down to the end of the spur road and viewed not only from our site out to the homes out in that area, but we had gone onto those properties looking back in just to see what it looked like. We did go around other areas where buildings were in close proximity within the adjoining development and perform the same tasks. We had gotten approximate elevations on the homes, and once you folks receive those cross sections, you will be able to see what has resulted from that. We did do the line of sight, and Jim can further elaborate on that. He has a copy of that once you folks have that in hand. What we did find was fairly consistent with what some of the abutters had said, that, you know, in terms of the tree canopy, the lower branches on the trees did leave a little bit of a window between the abutting parcels and the subject parcel, and that's what we're looking to fill in the gaps. I will say that as Jim does his presentation, I know Mrs. Hassinger had mentioned the rhododendrons. So we did look at those. I did mention that to Jim. I said they're near and dear to our heart, so let's see what we can do. So we did look at a couple areas, and what Jim had done is he had cited rhododendrons in an area where he felt that they would flourish. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jim, and perhaps he could walk you through it verbally and hopefully get us through the illustrative. Thank you.
Thank you again. My name is Jim Almonte from WDA Design Group, a registered landscape architect with the firm. I presume you have the information in front of you now. So what we did, as Wayne mentioned, we walked the perimeter of the site, looked at some of the areas of concern, and developed some of these cross sections for you. And I'll just start at the top of the page and work my way down. So the first one that you get to on the top of the page, as you went to the site, plan view is on the right hand side. The cross sections are on the left. So as you enter the site, the units that you see at the top of the page are the first units on the right hand side as you enter the site, and then the existing home behind that building is 29 and 31 Church Street. So behind that existing home right now, the one on site with the pool, there's a row of giant arborvitaes on the Locust property, just outside the fence. The fence is actually a few feet onto the Locust property. So there's already somewhat of a buffer there now. So what we're proposing to do is basically replicate that and add another row of giant arborvitaes in front of that, planted. If you look at the cross section on the left of the plan view, planted at 6 to 7 feet in height. So we also projected out, based on the growth rate, what those trees would look like, 5 and 10 years down the road. Planting 5 years down the road and 10 years down the road. So the giant arborvitaes have a pretty rapid growth rate, probably close to 2 to 3 feet a year. So you can see the darker tree there is the tree at the planting, projected out 5 years to be about 20 feet or so, and then 10 years down, once it gets established, 10 years down the road, closer to 36 feet or so in height. So that's the top plan view and cross section for that area. And then the next area that we looked at is, as you loop around the road there, the home at 65 through 68 Nottingham Road is shown there on the second one. So we did two cross sections at this location. One looking to the unit to the east, or I'm sorry, to the west, and then one looking directly back into the site, the 3-unit building there, the 3-unit and the 6-unit. So the first cross section is the 6-unit building, so it's kind of looking off to the left, and we projected it from people standing on their decks. We measured the approximate height of the decks, so looking back towards the site, looking at the existing buildings, we've beefed up the buffer plantings in that area with the use of spruce trees and eastern red cedars. So again, planted at 6 to 7 feet in height. The units on site are a little bit lower in elevation from the existing home there at 65 through 68 Nottingham. So again, planting at 6 to 7 feet. These are a little bit slower growing, probably about a foot or so per year. So we projected this out at 10 years and at 20 years. You can see the height growth at those time periods. This cross section just below that is looking directly north into the site. The building's a little bit further away. Again, we have eastern red cedars proposed along that property line, and you can again see the growth rate out at 10 and 20 years down the road. And then the last one we looked at was along the spur road, where you have the kind of the hammerhead turnaround there, and the units there are 58 through 64 Nottingham Road. Again, we're proposing a Cannon fir in that location and an eastern red cedar. We're trying to spec plant material that is somewhat native and can tolerate these types of conditions. What we found when we went out there is that in most locations, the rhododendrons wouldn't provide enough height to screen the proposed buildings. So we did propose them along the back of, I believe that's building 9, where the only thing we really needed to screen was the road at Nottingham Road. There was no units there, so we did propose to add some rhododendron in that location. So that's essentially the cross sections. I know some of the plant material that you see on this plan wasn't on the original plans that were submitted to the board. So as Wayne mentioned, we're going through the process now, responding to the comments that were received. And I believe the plan is to just issue one set of documents, one set of plans all at once. So you'll see these changes to the plant material and to the landscape plans on the next set of revisions that are submitted.
So I have a question. It seems though that, especially in the second and third examples you have here, that it's actually going to take 10 years and for, the plantings you have, for it to even come close to, it's not even gonna provide screening, based on where the existing structure, site view is.
Right.
Is there a consideration to actually buy older trees so that the screening will occur much quicker? Instead of waiting, like the middle one, it's like almost 20 years before they're really gonna have any good screening from the buildings.
Right. We projected the line of sight as worst case. So you're standing at the deck and you're looking
Yeah.
essentially at the roof, the peak of the roof of the proposed units. And in that situation, the homes at Nottingham are in higher elevation, so you're losing height there as well. It's just the nature of the topography, unfortunately. It's something that we can consider, planting something a little bit taller. But
Just so they get to screening a little
Right.
bit quicker,
Right.
Like the first one is good. It's like
Right.
after 5 years.
right, you already have a
Yeah,
buffer
good
there
screen,
already
right.
that we're preserving. So it's something we can consider.
The alternative is something that's just not 29 feet in those areas, as far as height of the building.
Right.
You mean having a building 29 feet high?
That's what it is proposed.
right.
In other words, if the building that they're showing their line of sight to is less than 29, then obviously that impacts sight line. But I will put a comment as to what's been presented to us, just as far as presentation wise. Bravo, as far as showing the projections, the different sight lines, going with the worst case scenario rather than the best case scenario. It's probably one of the best presentations I've seen in my entire time on the board. So
Thank
just
you.
to commend that from how it was put together, not to speak to the actual
Right.
site itself.
I taught him everything he knows. I used to do that stuff back in the day.
As an engineer, I always want this and ask for it, and this is the first time I've gotten anything close to
Right.
doing it well. It still shows that you can see some of the project,
Yep. Yep.
but it gives us much better information than we often get,
Thank you.
or we ever get.
And sometimes it's hard to read a plan, and when you see pictures and cross sections.
Well, the cross sections are the
Right.
what we get, unless we want to go out and work with contour lines, we're not going to find out.
Right.
And you've got better tools than we have.
Rule of thumb always with a visual, I think, is great, and it doesn't always translate, is that if the visual can be done without a presentation, then it's a good visual.
That's right. That's right.
It shouldn't have to be spoken to.
That's it. Let it do its talking for you, That's the thing with these guys, with the landscape architects in the office. That's half of it right there.
Let all the young guys do it that know all this software.
That's
So
right.
I didn't do it. I just told them what to do, what I wanted.
Who has the big screen?
Yeah.
You get the
two
big
screens.
screen.
Yeah, we got 2 double monitors.
Okay, more on this?
That's it for cross sections.
That's it for presentation. If you folks have any other questions.
Do we have any questions at this point? We'll see, because we got a lot of people who,
I have some
do
questions.
them first.
You want to do them first?
No,
Oh.
we start with you, then we go to them, then we come back here. More or less, whatever works. Okay, anything?
Well, I wasn't here, but I did see the video. And one of the things I thought would be a good question to answer, and I'm not sure if you answered it, but I'm going to ask it straight up.
Sure.
Taking the current conditions of the property, okay, how much water, additional water, will be leaving the property than today, once you do your development? How much more will be leaving the property? Because it is a lot more hardscape. So there's not, there's less chance of the water actually being absorbed
Sure.
as today. So has there been a study, or through your analysis, have you determined what additional water will be coming out of there? And what made me think of this is I was driving up Millbury today, Millbury Street, and this huge stream of water was coming out of West Street. And in my mind, I was like, oh, once that development goes in, that water's probably gonna be doubled or tripled.
Yep.
Unless you've put, stuff in place to absorb it.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, we did design the system with a stormwater attenuation system as required under the state stormwater regulations, as we discussed with you and with the Conservation Commission. Has been peer reviewed by Graves Engineering to their satisfaction. So again, to answer the question, we're required to not exceed the peak rate of runoff in the 210 and the 100-year storm events. So yes, I do appreciate the comment, especially when you get rains like today. In that particular case, like I said, we're not going to be adding more in that direction or in any direction.
So your basins are gonna, storm basins are gonna absorb all that.
They're going
well-
to hold it back and, yep,
Your peak flow is not going to exceed the current peak flow.
that's correct.
But I think we established that the total amount of water, over however long it takes, will be more.
That's correct.
It just that it won't gush any faster, at the, this like has a peak and then it tapers off and the peak is still
That's
hopefully
correct.
limited.
No, and he raises a great point. Basically, what tends to happen is if you have a site where you've got runoff leaving the site, when you introduce that impervious area, it wants to leave quicker. So the key is hold that back so that by the time some of the localized water leaves the site, you can slowly release that impervious area stormwater, and that's basically the way it works.
So the flow remains the same.
That's correct.
Okay.
The peak flow
Yeah.
just flows longer. Okay, anybody else up here? Okay, I know there's at least one, first here. Yep.
It's just a question. David Stevens, 34 South Street, and a butter by definition. I am concerned that trees are foliage and foliage is temporary. It dies, it gets eaten, it burns, and may well not outlive the houses it is to screen. How do we deal with that? What's the probability of these trees surviving as long as the structures and in a way close to the ground that would do the appropriate screening, please?
Well, the probability of the trees surviving, I think, are pretty good. We try to spec native plant material that will grow in these types of conditions, and stay away from the evergreens. These are all evergreens, and no, not deciduous for the buffer plantings. We tried to spec trees that hold their bottom branches longer than others. We stayed away from the use of white pines that tend to grow quickly, but they also lose their bottom branches quickly. So the type of plant material that we specified was specific for these conditions. As far as, if something does happen, if they do die, I think it's in the best interest of the owner to keep the property looking, as good as it can at the time of planting. So, it's more of a maintenance thing than anything else. If something does die, and if something does die within the first year or so, this is usually warranted. So they'll be replaced at no cost to the owner. So.
And don't we usually put conditions in the approval?
We put conditions that, under special permits, that screening needs to be maintained.
Correct.
So that if it was removed for any reasons, it would have to be put back.
Right.
Removed or fails.
Or eaten.
Yeah.
Or eaten.
Or die.
The gypsy moths.
Right.
Yep.
Okay,
Good evening and happy Earth Day. My name is Daniel Vallone, Vellone. I reside at 51 Church Street. I have some handouts that I prepared for the board. Would it be all right if I present them? So I've provided one copy, which is an original, which is labeled as planning board. There's a second copy, which is identical, stamped copy, should the board wish to provide a copy to the applicant for this evening's discussion. That is at your discretion. The reason I'm here tonight is I would like to request the board's consideration to exercise their responsible due diligence in requiring additional information from the applicant prior to moving forward with the approval of the application. Specifically, I want to address the issue of the stormwater detention basins that was raised by not only one of the board members this evening, but also the applicant's design engineer noted that there's a redesign currently underway for the stormwater basins. Before I do that, however, since a lot of tonight's discussion on the project was addressing the sight lines, I just wanted to pose a question to the board. Has the applicant's design team looked at selectively retaining existing foliage bordering the neighboring properties so that some of the existing tree canopy can provide natural screening already, which may require a redesign of the site layout, but it may be advantageous to the surrounding community? So I'm putting that out there rhetorically for the board's consideration, whether you want to have the applicant's design team address that tonight or not. That's at your discretion, but I would like to reserve most of my time to discuss the stormwater system. Specifically, Joe, if we could put up, I think it's C302. It's the figure that...
We're not going to be able to see that here.
Understood, which is why there's 3 copies. I gave you my copy, and then there's 2 copies there. But for the audience
I
sake,
can share, I guess. There are 3 copies or 2 copies?
there's three copies of the figure that I'm referring to now.
I'll just listen, it's okay.
Could you confirm what site plan number that is? Yes.
C 1.02.
1.02, thank you.
So, just make sure that we get them at the end. It's, and this is for everyone, including the applicant, any hard copies, if we can have copies for the whole board and then staff for future hearings. That way we don't have to rely on computer screens that don't work for the public hearing.
And preferably in advance of the hearing, not at the hearing.
And I apologize, and I would be happy to follow up with a formal submittal after tonight's hearing with these copies. I'm actually here as a follow-up to the March 25th meeting where I had raised some of these issues, and the vice chair had actually suggested that I went to the Conservation Commission with some of these concerns. I presented my concerns in front of the Conservation Commission April 2nd in person and in writing, and then I followed up with the Conservation Commission at their April 22nd meeting in writing. My concern is specifically with the handling and management of the subsurface water management system. On that figure that's on the screen, yes, on the figure on the screen, there are some polygons which show the delineations between adjacent soil boundaries. Those polygon lines represent different soil types that have been mapped within the study area. Before I go on, I should reiterate that I work for the Natural Resources Conservation Service as the Northeast Regional Geologist. I manage the geology program throughout Massachusetts and throughout the New England states, but I am here as an abutting landowner. I reside at 51 Church Street. I have deeded access to my property through Churchill Condominium Trust 3, which shares the common drive and which abuts the site development. The soil descriptions that is included on that figure that's on the screen right now talks about different soil series, specifically the Paxton Fine Sandy Loam. Now, the Paxton Fine Sandy Loam, if you were to look at the subsurface water management handout, it discusses the fact that the soil class has very limited capability to handle water, specifically because of slow water movement and because of dense subsoil layering beneath it. I'm happy to share.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, so that is printed off directly from the Web Soil Survey, which is referenced on this figure. It's also referenced in Exhibit 6, the Stormwater Management Report that was submitted as part of the applicant's package. Now, specifically in terms of Exhibit 6 in the Stormwater Management Report, it talks about that, and it's page 6 of that report, it's PDF page 8, that the calculations for the stormwater management is based on a hydrologic soil group C. Now, there are specific design parameters that address how one would determine the hydrologic soil group. And so that determination is actually made by, it's from this particular publication. This is National Engineering Handbook, Part 630 Hydrology, which is produced by the Natural Resources Conservation Service, the agency that I work for. And this goes through the different parameters to come up with that hydrologic soil group. The report specifically says that the calculations that all of the stormwater management system design is based upon a hydrologic soil group C. But in fact, the soils at this site exhibit characteristics of a hydrologic soil group D, which means infiltration is further limited, which supports that finding, the fact that the soil has a limited capacity to absorb the water. The reason this is important is the 3 detention basins that are designed on site are designed for the purposes of exfiltration, or the soil's ability to absorb that water. And if you look at the information that's available in front of you, as well as on the Web Soil Survey, you'll see that the depth to water table of this soil at its shallowest depth is 8 centimeters, which corresponds to 3.5 inches. It's this handout here, depth to water table. I actually provided 2 copies of that depth to water table figure, because that 3.5 inches or 8 centimeters is the absolute shallowest that water would be under a seasonal condition. The second one, with this kind of yellow image, which talks about the depth to water table, this presents an average value for that soil class, which is 23.23 inches. If you go to the design chart for coming up with the hydrologic soil group, you'll see that depth to water table of shallower than 24 inches forces the soil into a hydrologic soil group D. So, in other words, all of the design calculations for the stormwater management plan are based on the wrong soil class.
Thank you.
Further to this point, this design table 7-1 talks about the saturated hydraulic conductivity of the soil. And if you look at this handout that I provided, which is yellow and red, this handout talks about the saturated hydraulic conductivity of the soil. And you'll see for soil group 305C, which is where the stormwater detention basins are proposed on the western extent of the property, has a rating of 0.5760 micrometers per second.
Thank you.
Based upon that value, that also forces this soil into a hydrologic soil group D. There are other parameters. The depth to the soil restrictive layer is another one that forces the soil into a hydrologic soil group C.
What does that mean, hydrologic soil?
So again, the ability of the soil to infiltrate water is corresponds to different soil classifications. And the soil classifications that underlie this site, which is shown on that figure and that polygon, it's not only specific to soil group 305, I gave away my handouts, but specific to where the detention basins are going to be, the soil group that is further to the west, adjacent to Church Street, also has a very limited capacity of that soil to infiltrate water.
And because it doesn't absorb the water, it flows.
Because,
Is that what you're saying?
because the soil has a limited capacity to infiltrate water, the detention basins will hold that water longer, and under the design flows, those basins could potentially overtop. Potentially, right? But that needs to be proven by analysis. The analysis needs to be reflective of actual as-built or actual in situ conditions. And I believe that the calculations are not representative of those particular soil classes. Now, there are additional considerations with that. In test pit 5 and 6, shown within the attachment to the stormwater report, it shows that shallow rock was encountered. It's listed as rock or ledge at 97 inches or 93 inches. Again, bedrock, should it be encountered, has a limited capacity to infiltrate water, right? There is additional information in terms of soil features. If you'll forgive me 1 second to find my handout. Here it is. If you were to look at all 11 test pits that the applicant's consultant did in support of this project, you'll see that groundwater seepage was encountered in several test pits at depths much shallower than the actual groundwater level. And so seepage is when water is weeping in from the side of the test pit, as opposed to groundwater, which is classified as a standing pool of water at the bottom of the excavation. But in addition to those, there was soil modeling, or what's known as redoxamorphic features. And redoxamorphic features are when water infiltrates or percolates through a soil as a medium, it leaches some of the nutrients out of that soil, and it changes the soil color. And so a redoxamorphic feature is what's known as modeling. So very commonly you'll see orange soils mixed in with gray soils. And that speckled pattern of orange and gray is known as soil modeling. Those soil models were documented in those test pits at a very shallow depth. All of that supports the fact that the Web Soil Survey, the database that I'm referencing tonight, shows that this soil group should really be a hydrologic soil group D and not a hydrologic soil group C. Therefore, because that information is inconsistent, I'm requesting that the board, through its due diligence, ask their consultant to go back and look at this information and ask the applicant to do a reanalysis. The reason this is important is because in the applicant's package, within those calculations, the Exhibit 6, it talks about rainfall precipitations. And it's modeled at a 2-year rainfall event, a 10-year rainfall event, and a 100-year rainfall event. Now, as it happens, this past Saturday it rained, and I was getting my recycling bin at the edge of my driveway. And through the trees, because the vegetation hasn't grown in yet, through the trees, I could see a disturbance in the field. So from the edge of Churchill Condominium 3, I looked into the field, and I could see water ponding in a test pit excavation. I'd like to provide you with a photo. I believe the water that's ponding in that excavation corresponds to test pit number 9, which is shown on this figure. And as a result, I believe that the soil has a very limited capacity to infiltrate. Now, what I've also provided you with there is a copy from the Worcester Regional Airport as to what the precipitation was that day. Because in the design calculations, when we talk about a 2-year rainfall event, we talk about 3.2 inches of rainfall. When we talk about a 10-year rainfall event, we talk about 4.88 inches of rainfall in a 24-hour period. And a 100-year rainfall event that is designed in the calculations is for an 8.84 inch rainfall event. What we saw, what was documented by NOAA at the Worcester Airport for this past Saturday, anyone want to take a guess? 0.64 inches, so less than 1 inch of rain had fallen in the preceding 24 hours, and yet that water was ponding in this excavation. Now, the reason this is significant is because this is the native soil that's underlying the design of these exfiltration basins. So if these basins are all designed as it's stated in Exhibit 6, that it's a different hydrologic soil group, then those numbers are not reflective of on-site conditions. I think this is significant enough to warrant the board's consideration to request this information from the applicant. In my March 25th presentation to the board, I requested that the board direct the applicant. I don't know that I used those exact words, but I requested that the board request from the applicant copies of the geotechnical soil boring logs. In the applicant's original application package, Exhibit 1F, here's copies of it.
Thank you.
In Exhibit 1F, it talks about that they were going to provide this information under separate cover to the board. And even though that was requested on March 25th at the board meeting, it was requested at April 2nd at the Conservation Commission meeting, nothing has been uploaded to the town's website. I believe it's pertinent to the board's consideration and to the town's consultant who is reviewing this information that we look at that soil boring information in consideration of these findings that the mapped soil classes do not match what is in the applicant's design analysis. We need additional data, and those soil borings will provide that additional data. Additionally, two of the soil borings that were performed, or let me correct my vernacular. Two of the test pits that were performed, test pits 5 and 6, encountered shallow bedrock. So if shallow bedrock is a consideration, then it's requested that the board look to have a further study being done in terms of how this material is going to be removed. Are we talking about hydraulic breakers and hoe rams? Are we talking about rock blasting? In the applicant's package, it talks about processing of materials on site. How is that processing going to be facilitated? And what is the impact to the church and to the surrounding community if rock blasting or hoe ramming has to take place because there's shallow bedrock? So in an exercise or in a gesture of transparency, I've provided the applicant with all of the information that I've provided to you tonight so that they can consider this information in their design. But at this point, all of the information that is presented in the applicant's package that has been submitted to the board does not substantiate that these considerations have been adequately addressed. And this is based upon my 20 years of professional experience doing this work, my master's degree in geotechnical engineering, and the fact that I'm a board certified professional geologist working for a federal government agency doing this work every day. Thank you for your time.
So, at one point, you asked for them to provide information, but earlier you said we should ask our consultant to tell us that we should ask them to do that. What do we want to do? Certainly your concerns have to be addressed in some way.
May I clarify?
Sure.
So I acknowledge the fact as a member of the public, I have no authority to request any information. The applicant is under no obligation to offer information to me as the landowner. But the board has the capacity to request that the applicant provide certain information to the board's satisfaction. And in the interest of public transparency, it would be expected that any information the board should receive would be posted for the public to review. So as a result, tonight, and I hope I'm using the proper terminology, but I'm requesting the board's consideration to ensure that this information is adequately addressed, either directly by the applicant to the board's satisfaction or the board through the town's engineering firm to make sure that this information is substantiated.
So my recommendation and request, because it would be really challenging, though it would be possible, it would take a lot of man hours to get a transcript of this meeting, is that this material is it's great. However, I'm not a soil scientist. The board isn't as well. If you're able to submit by email your request so that I can forward it off to Graves Engineering, that will help, because we look for Graves Engineering to be able to, respond and guide to the board. The borings, there was information that the applicant emailed at 10 o'clock this morning. Those are not yet up on the website. I'm sure there are issues that they are working on and responding to your original comments, and also with conservation, but then also from that March one. But if there's something that you can provide documentation as far as recommending through the board to our peer consultant, looking at the soil class and what is used for the calculations, that would be helpful, because I will do my best verbally to relay that.
Sure.
But I'm sure I'm going to miss something.
And again, all of the attachments that I've provided everyone this evening, I saved them as a PDF, so I'll be able to provide those exact copies electronically. And I will be happy to articulate these comments in a follow-up letter to the board outlining some of these, but in the interest of time, I just didn't have the ability to do it, and I apologize for not doing it in advance.
Plus, they can look at the recording of this.
Well, we might,
That Graves Engineering would not be necessarily watching the meeting in order to gather that. We'd be telling them, calculate at your hourly rate, watching the meeting, and then not having this. So if we can sort of get to the crux by, if you can do exactly as we said, at least that would be beneficial.
I think they have to have the material. I don't know how well the material will lay out clearly and quickly to them exactly what your points are, though, and a DVD that shows, that covers his presentation might make it clearer, faster, if that's available, but I wouldn't slow things down getting that.
I would suggest delivery in as few words as you possibly can. Well, eloquence notwithstanding and expertise notwithstanding, half of what you said is useless to us.
Okay.
Because
so-
we can't comprehend at that level, you know what I mean?
Nor do we have it in front of us to
Right, yeah.
reference 17 million reference points that you spoke during your presentation.
It's understood, which is why I provided copies as I had the ability to do so, and I will be happy to articulate it. I will go one step further, and to make myself available to the board and to the board's consultant, should they wish to contact me directly, they may reach out to me, and I would be happy to have a conversation with them.
But I did understand your point, and that's the important thing. I'm sure you guys did too, right? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I followed where you're going, although it was a long trail, but I don't know what the other folks are gonna say about how important this is, or what difference it would make.
In summation, there's multiple lines of evidence pointing to the same thing, and I appreciate you allowing me the time to step through that. If I simply, and at the Conservation Commission, I simply provided them with the information that water infiltration is very limited, but we didn't get into the weeds on that. And as the Conservation Commission is not responsible for approving the applicant's plan, I wanted to make sure that the board had full consideration of the multiple levels that this is.
I would push back and say that they may have been more uniquely educated for dealing with this specific issue. They issue the stormwater permit.
Sure.
We will not be. So I'd encourage making sure that anything you send to us, how detailed it is, also gets sent to conservation, because we use the same engineering consultant.
Sure.
So Graves Engineering did the peer review for stormwater for conservation as well as for us. So making sure that we get broad exposure to both boards is very important, because it might give the Conservation Commission, who then, this project is being designed to their standards. The applicant has requested a waiver so that they design to the more stringent standard, which is conservation and not planning. I'd encourage CCing Conservation Commission on anything you communicate on this, so we can make sure that both boards are able to properly, vet as far as the exact points that you're making.
Sure.
And especially because there's some people on the Conservation Commission that probably may be able to interpret what you were saying a lot more expertly, because they are a civil engineer. I know what you're getting at, and I can understand the significance, so I'm going to follow up with Graves Engineering, make sure that they're aware and looking out for this. But just would encourage providing that same information to conservation.
And for clarity, the information was already provided to them in writing April 2nd and April whatever the second meeting was, April 16th, if I recall correctly.
I believe that was their second.
So-
If what you're getting ready to send us, though, includes, say, a new narrative or a new statement, then be sure.
I will be certain to copy them. Again, thank you for the time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have anyone else who has a comment or a?
Thanks for letting me talk. My name's Philip Knock. I'm a resident of 51 Nottingham Road. I was asking about the growth rates on the plantings that you were talking about. You were talking about like, is he still here?
I'm here.
Oh, you're here? Okay, you're a gentleman. But those
He's the little guy at the table.
Okay, that's fine.
You want to
see-
swap?
No, it's just a real simple question. Are the growth rates basically in open air space? Is it kind of like where you're, are they put in like with no, like if you put in a middle of a field, those growth rates would be expected? Is that my understanding?
Yes,
Okay.
pretty much.
Okay, so are the stone walls are gonna remain, right?
Yes.
So you're basically
The
planting.
ones that are on the property line.
Right, okay. So you can put the plantings just on the other side of the base of the stone walls, pretty much?
Right.
Okay. So all those plantings from our property at Bruce Hollow would be on the northern side of the tree lines. So those trees would be hindered from those kind of growth rates because the trees on our property would be shading those evergreens. So the only way to get those growth rates would be if we took out the trees on our side of the property lines, from what I would think. Does that seem reasonable?
Well, I mean, I don't know if you want to.
Okay, no, you can come up if you want. I'm just asking. It just seemed like reasonable.
It's okay, just knock my name around there.
Trying to not hit the microphone.
Such a violent.
Hit the other one.
He was trying to be quiet.
Thank you.
Go right there. Thank you.
I mean, the challenge with trying to provide buffer plantings is, allowing enough sunlight into these areas for growth. And when you're obviously doing buffer plantings, you want evergreens. We try to specify evergreens that tolerate some shade in these areas. He's correct. Some areas, the buffer plantings are on the north side of the tree line. They will get some sun in the morning and afternoon. So I'm not sure where your property is, 51 Nottingham, but
I'm not actually on that.
okay. So I mean that is what we had specified, plant material that can handle these types of conditions. And predicting a growth rate, it varies under every condition. So we tried to use the information that was available to project those types of growth rates. Whatever information is available. So, I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
Okay, so, but it possibly would be slower than your expectations.
potentially, yeah.
Because we got oak trees up there.
So what happens too is once the trees get established, the growth rate increases. So it might be a little bit slower up front, and then over time, they kind of kick in and root system gets established, and they grow quicker as time goes on.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Anyone else?
Hi, Deborah George, 63 Nottingham. One of the points that I do want to bring forward is that it's my understanding that this proposed development, they're two-story buildings, and Bruce Hollow is effectively 1.5 stories. They're split levels. So, and this proposed project will be sitting at a higher elevation. So this is, in a sense, towering over Bruce Hollow. And then just for clarification, at our last meeting, I mentioned that from my living room window, I'd be looking onto the back end of, I think, 8 of these apartment buildings. Can you talk about the plantings that will screen these two-story buildings from me?
I think we already did that.
I thought that was
Did
what
she
he
see
showed
this?
us.
Were you not here the entire meeting?
No, I was
Well,
here.
She may not have seen this.
No, but I don't see where.
See, this is, I think, where you are.
She's 63 Nottingham.
I'm 63, so looking across the Nottingham Road, the top of the hairpin.
I'm sorry, whereabouts? So I can point it up. There it is. Jim. Yep.
So as I look across Nottingham Road to the back end of 8 of your apartment buildings, what is the buffer along that?
That's the last cross-section on that page. So it would be Canaan fir and eastern red cedar, a combination of those two plants.
Okay, that's showing up. If I'm looking at this, I'm looking at an existing structure, a back deck. I don't have a back deck facing Nottingham
That
Road.
cross section isn't provided. She's across the street.
I'm across the street.
So let me just.
Sorry,
okay.
I thought she was in
No.
Let me just throw in again. Sorry for the board. You won't see this. She's over here. Whoop. Come on, touch screen. She's this way. So I think the question is, as if the board is sort of looking at that cross section D, it's perpendicular on the other side. This stuff right there. What was?
That's where
That-
the roadies are. In
That's where the
location.
roadies are.
Yeah. A combination of roadies and red cedars. And the existing vegetation on their property.
Jim, how tall do rhododendrons get?
The ones that we specified can, over time at maturity, they could be 8 to 10 feet tall.
Okay, but that's a
Right.
two-story building.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the comments of the building heights. As I started the presentation before Jim had gotten into it, I mentioned the tree canopy and the lower branches of the tree, and the understanding that we had from the board was to fill that gap. And I believe at the last meeting, and I believe based on what Jim has provided, we've done that. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Good evening. I'm Linda Hutchins, 3 Spanish River Road. I was at the last meeting. I sent in a comment letter yesterday that I pretty much spent my Easter Sunday working on. So I'm not going to read the letter.
Wait, is that on the?
Yes, it is. Exhibit 20.
Okay, go ahead.
The last one.
And I guess for the record, as Mr. Vallone did, I'll introduce myself as another federal employee who's a hydrogeologist in town. I work for the FEMA Region 1, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, doing an environmental protection specialist for them. I'm also a professional geologist, and I do environmental reviews for them of public assistance grants to communities in New England. My primary concern with the development plans at this time is the stability of that steep slope that comes down to Church Street on the west side of the property. The town's current hazard mitigation plan maps that as a landslide hazard as it is, without any additional perturbation or development. The development plan is to remove most of the vegetation from that steep hillside and pond water near the middle of that steep hillside. And I'm concerned that this could be a real recipe for disaster. I don't usually wax very dramatic, but I don't want to underemphasize how serious a problem this could be. And I have not seen it evaluated in any of the plans or reports. I've seen how they intend to get rid of the stormwater, but as Mr. Vallone said, no real evaluation of the groundwater conditions and the soil saturation on that, very steep hillside. So I'm requesting that the board request or have performed a geotechnical evaluation of that steep slope with that proposed design. It was mentioned earlier this evening that the developer is working on a revised stormwater plan, so maybe this could be part of that, along with Mr. Vallone's concerns about the soil type. I also noticed in those test pits that there is water seeping at very shallow depths. So I really would think a geotechnical evaluation would be appropriate before any planning board decision is made on this site. Landslides do happen in Massachusetts and in New England. We think of them as something that happens on the West Coast, but they do happen here. I took a look at the state hazard mitigation plan yesterday, and the state geologist writes that 1 to 3 notable landslides happen in Massachusetts every year. When I worked for the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation, I saw landslides in Topsfield, Massachusetts, and Greenfield, Massachusetts, Coleraine, Massachusetts, and Williamstown, Massachusetts, on slopes with the same type of geology and steepness. I also suggest that the developer minimize any clearing of vegetation on that steep slope, because that vegetation is helping that soil hang on to that slope, and it also takes up water. This could be a very serious matter of property damage and life safety to our community, as well as inconvenience if that was to slide down to Church Street and, God forbid, all the way down to Providence Road. In closing, I think this plan puts too much pressure on this sensitive landscape, and I suggest that it be scaled back for many reasons. I guess that's about it. I'll also put in a plug, a suggestion to reduce the vegetative clearing as much as you can. I don't think you need to clear cut that whole hillside, and I think it would be dangerous to do so. Hopefully I'm wrong. A geotechnical evaluation could prove that out. I'd be very happy if that were the case, but I'm very concerned that it hasn't been done yet. Also put in a plug for a threatened species, the northern long-eared bat, and it is Happy Earth Day. The northern long-eared bat is threatened throughout the northeast United States. It has suffered population decline from the white nose syndrome, and there's a very small population left. And that population of northern long-eared bats rely on the habitat of our forests to raise their young and to hunt in the summer. So one more reason not to please cut down all the trees at the top of that hill. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could respond, I did read Ms. Hutchins' letter. Well written. I just wanted to clarify a couple things. First of all, with respect to the stormwater basins, we are making a modification to basin number 3, as discussed with the chair and of the Concom and members of the commission. That basin is being redesigned as a gravel wetland, and that is the basin that we're making modifications to.
That's the one on the eastern side of the property?
That's correct. With respect to the location of the basins, 1 and 2, it's noted here that the slope of the location of where those basins are located is a 30% slope. The only 30% slope on the site, as indicated in my letter in the narrative and in my initial presentation to the board, is in the southwest corner of the site. This particular area where the basins are located are what, 15%, Jim?
Yeah, about 16.
Okay. So that's at about a 15% slope. The grading associated with the building, the basins comply with the state stormwater regulations, which require an inside basin slope of 3 to 1. Whenever we grade these basins out, we grade the down gradient slope at 3 to 1 as well, never steeper. For the simple reason that we wouldn't want a blowout condition. The cross section of the basin is shown on our detail sheets, has a clay-like liner in the middle of that basin, in the middle of that berm, to hold the water in. I must say that the basin needs to, as the board knows and as discussed with the Conservation Commission, again, and as reviewed by Graves Engineering, the basin needs to draw down in 72 hours. So that is the state requirement. We have demonstrated in our calculations that it drains within the required timeline. The other thing I wanted to raise, or respond to was, the long-eared, bat. I did look on, so first of all, the site does not fall within the jurisdiction of natural heritage, so, we did look at that a couple years ago when we started the process with Mr. Brossi, working on the feasibility study on the project, and continue to look at information like that as the project evolves to this stage. Nowhere has it been indicated that it's within the within the jurisdiction of natural heritage. And looking at the latest map regarding the habitat for the northern long-eared bat, the maternity roost trees, and the hibernacula, I'm looking at a document that I think I forwarded to Joe earlier today that was most recently updated by the NHESP on the 16th of this month, indicates that there's no habitat in the area. In fact, the closest habitat they have is east of Framingham and southwest of Southbridge. I know that there are bats in the area. I have bats at my house. I have a bat house I built, and unfortunately, the birds have taken it over. But again, with respect to that, I provided information to Joe via email today on that. Thank you.
As to the question of geotechnical inspection, or deciding whether it's something we should be asking for.
I had forwarded this email off to Graves with the intent of asking for their comment.
Okay. So we'll be hearing from our engineer about what he says we should do about that.
Great, thank you. And I'd also refer you to Stephen Maybe, the state geologist at UMass Amherst, who has quite a bit of expertise about this and maybe could offer his own opinion.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. We can, I guess that you're going to want to ask to continue the hearing.
We'd like to continue the public hearing to what is the next available date?
Well, there's available, and then there's basically what I think is going to be time for us to be able to
Agreed.
respond and schedule. I think the traffic is probably one of those things that we should start to address. And
Agreed.
realistically, we're looking at, I think, the 20th, because if you still are doing counts, that would mean if you were going to have the report done in a day or two, that might be something that we could have done for the following meeting. But it sounds like we're going to need a little bit more time. So I'd recommend the 20th. As when we started, May 20th, that is. As when we started this project, I think we all were up front letting the applicant and residents know that special permits require 4 out of 5 members. We have 2 possible seats that are one definite, and then a second will likely not be here. So after the election the following day, March 21st, we will likely have to just re-advertise the whole public hearing over, and provided we have appointments, we may have a write-in. Don't know. I've heard no rumors, but we will likely have to do an appointment.
And I don't know what Paul's situation is, but he may also
Not be eligible.
Well, he's not going to be eligible.
Right. So on the 20th, we'll know probably better how we're going to handle the public hearings with maintaining and trying to then get eligible panel.
Okay, so if we understand, Mr. Chairman and Joe, then after that date, we're possibly looking at changes on the board. Is that what we're understanding?
Well, there's definitely going to be changes on the board. After Election Day, there will only be 4 of us, and Paul's not going to be available. So,
He's leaving me.
and he's
Moving.
purchased he's moving. He's purchased a house in Texas, and he's selling his house here, and presumably will be leaving before very long. We don't know, because no one's running for her seat. We might get, a write-in that would accept this position. If not, then you got to advertise for, to do an appointment for that. When he leaves, then have to advertise for an appointment for his seat. It's going to be a challenging next couple of months.
Well, Mr. Chairman, you're a little bit more seasoned than I at this. So in terms of that, the process after the 20th, how does that work? Do they do the Mullins rule thing, or how does this work?
No. They have to have been present throughout, or after they're a member of the board, they can miss one hearing and do the Mullen.
Right.
But that's all. People who aren't yet a member of the board haven't been here for what we've done, and when they come in, it's going to have to be re-advertised. But I'm looking to get a sufficient number of people so that we can
Get the supermajority vote.
Yeah.
Actually, you need a 4/5. You need 4 yes votes for the special permit.
Right.
Regardless of how many people are sitting here. If there are only 3 here, you can't get 4.
Right, right.
But even if we have 4 and a 4, so it's
okay.
Not the first time that I've seen this.
Thank you.
Okay. So anyway, the 20th. You're gonna. Do you have a form?
Oh, yeah, there's somebody else who
Thank you,
wants to
Natalia.
speak.
I just have a quick question.
Well, you need to come down here so that we can.
You guys are talking about the board.
Please come to the microphone.
Sorry. Lori Wilkins, 65 Nottingham. My question is, you're talking about the board and the changes. But I also remember in the last meeting, I think the vice chair had to recuse herself because
No.
she was related.
No.
To somebody at Bruce Hollow?
I said that my brother is currently renting
Okay.
in Bruce Hollow, and he's her brother-in-law.
Okay. So that's why I was wondering
we,
where that went.
We don't think that is an issue with the ethics,
That's all I
particularly
was
because
wondering.
we made it known. Without that, we'd be down to 1 person.
Right. That's why I was wondering.
No, there's a rule about rule of necessity that comes into this ethics thing.
Gotcha.
And in this case, it's certainly necessary.
Thank you.
Okay.
Motion to grant the applicant's written request to continue this hearing to Monday, May 20th, 2019 at 7:30 PM.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? So voted.
Should note that Mike was not part of that vote.
Yeah, Mike was not part of it. He was here for the,
Was not part of the continued.
this is his first miss.
Yes.
Right? Okay. So he can mull on this.
Yep.
Okay, please be quiet leaving. We have some business and we have five minutes to do it. I think the first thing is this.
Yep. So,
Okay.
Could you please, could everybody please? Okay. Yes.
so it's pretty straightforward.
Can I leave the water for you guys on the back there? The bottles for you guys?
Sure.
Sure.
Okay.
Thanks.
So late last week had been someone had just in thinking about a potential development that came within here. They basically asked a question. So if there was some design standards that they want to propose to change, what would that process be to get them to change. And I said, well, let me take a look. And I'm looking through and I'm like, okay, we don't have an escape valve. I contact Ted Brovitz and saying, don't we have an escape valve somehow? And he's like, I think we cut it out when we were getting really mindful about the number of pages. Well, we need an escape valve. This is basically it. So that if they can make a argument on why a performance or design waiver should be waived, and it would be by way of special permit, this basically would lay it out. It's not, doesn't waive anything like the affordability requirement. These are the performance, so it's basically parking, lighting, signage, some of the architectural elements, some of the dimensional things like the length of building, the narrowness of buildings as it faces streets. So basically those drawings, that section. So it's like, as I relate to them, realistically, you'd have to present a good case, and that there is a lot of latitude in what you can have. So, for example, this specific one had to do with this question about length of building facing a street. And you have a minimum of 60 and a maximum of 150. And I'm like, there's a lot of room in there for you to fit. What happens if you want it a little narrower? What happens if you want it a little bigger? It's like, well, we don't have something, so you have to design it. That's where, in consulting with Ted, he had provided some language that was used in a different village district. I amended it to reflect really ours and how these would be specific for the performance and design standards. So,
Since this didn't come up during the hearing and we closed the hearing, are we?
We're deliberating on our own article.
I don't think we're bound by the hearing. No. So, what's everybody think?
Well, what is the decision we're trying to make here?
So this would have to be within the report recommended as an amendment to the article.
Which, can we do that without a public hearing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what we typically, there's one aspect of it which I think, as Bob points out, is a bit out of the ordinary, but generally speaking, in our report to town meeting, we can recommend passage with amendments, with recommended amendments. So we can recommend that the proposed change as printed in the town warrant be adopted with some additional amendments that basically have come out of the public hearing process, which I think is part of your point, Bob, that the need for this, the idea for this really was not raised during the public hearing. So we're coming up with this after the fact, but since the warrant article, the changes originated with us to begin with as our proposed
This is just essentially part of our deliberations.
Yeah.
And the board can basically say, you know what, let's wait until fall. If we want, we can just add it at the fall. The existing village mixed use did not have an escape valve.
Right.
Whether or not that's why no one even used it.
No, not using
that
something that
could.
doesn't exist, Mike.
But
that is the other possibility, that we take up this further amendment in the fall town meeting.
Mm-hmm. This is not a fatal flaw.
No.
This is not something that without it we run the risk of having some form of invalid bylaw. This is really like a, you know what, we really should have a provision like this because by way of a special permit, which then is voluntary for them to apply to, and that they can then make their argument. It's good to have an escape valve because we don't know from one side to the other what will work.
I move that we vote to go past the 10 o'clock deadline.
Second.
Moved in second to discussion, hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Timely motion made at 9:59 p.m.
And 20 seconds. Yeah, I was ready to, okay, so, what do you want to do?
I think you should wait to the fall.
Wait to the fall to do this, do the rest of it
Yeah, proceed as planned with everything else. And yes, if this, since this is, it would be a useful addition, but not time critical. We have, and I think to the extent that the public pays attention, the public was not informed that this would be proposed as part of the thing, that's.
I don't think there's a scope of the article,
Not really.
issue there. But,
Okay.
that's probably, as long as you think.
Like I said, I don't consider it a fatal flaw. And I've basically, my response was, you know what? I really think there's enough latitude that if you think you need to go beyond a certain dimension, you really should look at the intent. This is a village. This isn't a urban commercial center. Pare something back to fit in, but that's where it really said to me, like, it would be good to have an escape clause, but it's not a fatal flaw. It's not mission critical. We don't have that existing, and the intent is this is allowed by right. You stay within these bookends.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think this is a good idea.
Okay, by unanimous consent, we'll just not do this now and wait for spring?
We'll remember to plan on this for the fall.
Oh, I'm just gonna move this right into the fall folder anyways.
Okay. All right. I don't think we really, are there any critical reports from planning board representatives? No. I didn't think so. No. As time permits, I had them say for the discussion, and I don't think time permits.
I don't think time permits, not tonight.
And I don't know anything else that can legally come before us.
Vote to adjourn.
Second.
Not debatable. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? So voted.